work with. So,
okay. Oops. Great. All right. Well, I think in the interest of staying on time and keeping our momentum, we should go ahead and get started. We've got 3 speakers this session. Sorry, I have too many documents. I'm going to get to the right one. A presentation and then 2 sort of flash talk / poster sessions. So I will introduce our first speaker for this session now, and then I'll reintroduce the other speakers. So I'm delighted to again have Knesha Rose-Davison with us to give a talk. She is the Public Health Program Director for the AgriSafe Network. Knesha obtained her Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences in 2002 and a Master's of Public Health in 2006 from Northern Illinois University. In June 2006, she obtained a certificate in agricultural medicine, which focused on rural occupational health and environmental health and safety. She's dedicated her career to health education and promotion to underserved and vulnerable communities. And her presentation today is entitled Approaching Safety and Health in Agriculture Through Diversity and Inclusion, a look at racism and its impact on agricultural health. And her co-authors include Sarah Dautrive, Linda Emanuel, Ainsley Fay, Charlotte Halverson, Tara Haskins, Stacy Jenkins, and Natalie Roy. Knesha, it's good to see you again, and I will let you take it away.
This has been the best morning ever. It's still morning. So I'm very excited to be here to present on this topic, and I'll go ahead and get my screen open here. Okay, let's see what's missing. Let me fix this. There we go. All right, so welcome to this session discussing approaching safety and health in agriculture through diversity and inclusion, a look at racism and its impact on agricultural health. So this topic is very important to me because for many of you, it wasn't in my bio, but I come from the rural Delta South in Arkansas. My grandfather was a sharecropper of cotton and soybeans. So while I lived there on and off throughout my life at the time, and until I was coming to this rural agricultural space, I had no idea of the impact of health and safety on people's lives in agriculture. So now I'm coming to realize some of the things that he dealt with several years ago, and I still have family members who work in that space today. So in our previous session, we kind of talked about vulnerable populations, and I definitely can see aspects of that looking back and thinking of the history of my family members and that rural Delta community in Phillips County, Arkansas. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the topic. And I really wanted to start, I love word clouds, because again, AgriSafe, anytime we kind of come into a new space, we love to do virtual think tanks where we get feedback across the spectrum. And this was really exciting because we had around 300 people register for this event and about 170 actually attend and participate. And we took information on their racial background, ethnic background, what they do in agriculture, and we really got a spectrum of participation from across the United States. But the word that rose to the top, which what is a single word that comes to your mind when you think about racism in agricultural health, that word was exploitation. And so that really speaks volumes around the beginnings of agriculture as an industry in the United States. And so this is just kind of just comments, people's thoughts about where they were coming from when they heard about the word racism. So inequality, economics, unbalanced, slaves, stolen, unfair, migrant, hurtful, farm workers. We talked about those hidden and vulnerable populations, manipulation, opportunity, ignored. Very, very powerful statements. So with this think tank that we hosted, which is really the basis of this presentation, We looked at Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, including Native Americans, Alaskans, Asian Americans, kind of a whole spectrum, as well as Hispanic and Latino ethnic groups, around their experience around disproportionate rates of poor outcomes for physical and mental health. So the pretense of this presentation is racism has recently been identified as a public health crisis by professionals, cities, and municipalities across the nation. Racism impacts social determinants of health by disrupting the distribution of money, power, and resources at national and local levels. So we're going to kind of share some of our findings and what that means for an approach, including this category in your safety and health outreach. So the objectives for today, we really want to talk about the relationship between racism and social determinants of health. There is a link there. Examples of health outcomes impacted by racism, and then what resources are available to help bring about these conversations of change, in various communities. So we'll go ahead and get started. And this is almost one of my favorite people in the world, outside of my grandfather, if you will, Dr. Kamara Jones. Really talks about what is racism. She's a past president of the American Public Health Association. And just remember her, because she's going to close us out with some action about dismantling racism. But I'm going to read this statement. Racism is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on social interpretation of how one looks, which is what we call race, that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities, unfairly advantages other individuals and communities, and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. So this is something that I think we've clearly seen throughout the pandemic, that it impacts everyone, and everyone has a role to play in addressing this issue. So our journey at AgriSafe with addressing the issue of racism, inclusion, and diversity started with a statement. It actually started with a conversation as we were seeing racial unrest across the United States throughout the pandemic. We were seeing high rates of COVID amongst essential workers, BIPOC populations with death rates and exposure with COVID. And so it really just started a conversation. Of course, George Floyd and other national news events back in the spring and summer of 2020 really just caused a heightened alarm across the United States in terms of responding to racialized violence. And we wanted to really look at what does that look like in our industry of agricultural safety. And so we kind of started an internal conversation as an organization as to what does this mean for agriculture? Because we were, people were calling racism out across the board, across the spectrum, across industries, and agriculture was not left out of that conversation. So with all of that, AgriSafe came up with a statement. It took us several months back and forth as staff, as board members, thinking about what is this issue, especially as it's announced as a public health issue. We kind of had a responsibility, or took a responsibility, that we wanted to respond to this issue. So this was our statement that we have. It is available on our website, on our homepage. We have a diversity and inclusion tab that you can pull that information up and see topics related to this issue. Our call to action also came from the approach of addressing total farmer health. We have modified or adapted the total worker health model to really address, where a farmer lives and works and how it impacts their health. And racism is a part of that. It affects a lot of various things around access, around stress, around social concerns when it comes to certain matters. So we just felt that it really aligned with our goal to really address health concerns for those who work and live in agricultural spaces. So that was another kind of charge that we really took personally, and we wanted to kind of look at this paradigm. So public health impacts of racism, what are those? As that statement, again, was coming from American Public Health Association, and we just heard a lot about racism. What does that really mean for the impact of public health? So we know that it shapes both opportunity and access to resources that support health. And these are just some examples, and we see it across any chronic illness, any disease and surveillance. We kind of see it, but just succinctly stating it, within the United States, up to a 7-year difference in life expectancy exists between racial and ethnic populations. Another example, Black women across the socioeconomic status are 3 times more likely than white women to die within 1 year of childbirth. There's been a big push around maternal outcomes, especially in the United States as a developed nation. We have very poor health outcomes when it comes to certain members of our society. Black, American Indian, Alaskan Natives, Hispanic Americans all have had a COVID-19 death rate that nearly triples that of white Americans. So we've been seeing headline and headline and headline of these disparities, especially coming out across the pandemic. And then weathering is a term that really describes how stress from coping with chronic toxic stress, from structural and interpersonal racism and bias over a lifetime causes physiological changes. The result is accelerated aging and increased risk of chronic disease and other adverse health outcomes, including premature death. So it really impacts the outcome and overall health of an individual. These are some really extreme things, again, that we see throughout the data, but we're kind of looking at how does racism shape and impact these things, but we see these poor outcomes in certain populations all the time. And this is not just, when we kind of did a think tank, I'll kind of get into that. Racism isn't just one thing. It's not just a personal experience. It could be structural. It can be interpersonal because of ways that society tends to view and label certain individuals, right? So it comes in a variety of different forms, but it has very dire health consequences. So AgriSafe did a virtual think tank, and I was coming to this as I created this presentation. Wow, we are about a year after we did this virtual think tank. It'll be a year on Friday. So we hosted a virtual think tank with a goal to recognize racism as a public health crisis and explore the impacts on the agricultural workforce. The think tank was held November 12th, 2020. And then we kind of created a report to summarize those results and emerging themes for next action steps. As I mentioned previously, we had about 340 people register for the event for a think tank, right? That we were trying to get a focus group. We want to get feedback, and it was just an overwhelming response there. It just kind of showed that we were really timely on that pulse point and on that issue. About 170 people, about 51% of the registrants actually joined in on the day of the event. On average, for things, we'll get registration. We have about 30%, 35% participation. So it was kind of over our normal threshold for participation, which again kind of spoke to people wanting to talk about this issue and how relevant it was. And then it was just really interesting beyond that, we for the first time asked questions about race, sexual orientation, veteran status. I don't know if we asked about disability, but we tried to get some information about diversity and what kind of people were in the audience. And on the race and ethnicity questions, oh my goodness, we probably had 384 people registered. We probably had a good 200, 150 various different answers around how people identified around race. So that's a whole interesting conversation on itself as how do we go about categorizing that information. But really what I wanted to point out were a few questions that we did for the virtual think tank, just to kind of bring us to this issue around health and equity. So what are the barriers to racial equity? What are the barriers to, racial equality and accepted diversity in agriculture? So we kind of wanted to know what were some of the concerns that rose up from our participants. Again, we had about 170 participants and about 50% responded. And these are listed in no particular order. So the issues of land access came up, financial resources around land and financial resources, imbalance of power around inequality, social determinants of health. So your housing, your healthcare access, your education, where you live impacts those various things. Unjust social economic policy, cultural bias, and ineffective communication. And these were kind of listed in no particular order, but there were common responses to this question. And we thought that was really telling and interesting about some ways to address racial concerns. And let's also speak to the point that AgriSafe serves in a safety and health space. So some of these things we don't necessarily own in terms of being able to effectively respond based on our mission. However, it plays a role in racism. It's a very complex issue that crosses the spectrum of sectors, not just health and safety, for example. When it comes to what health conditions or health disparities are impacted by racism, we kind of tallied them together and listed them by order of frequency. Mental health was at the top of that list. Healthcare access was second on that list. A participant said all of them or everything was also very high. So this is kind of telling around, again, that audience, that one moment in time, the feedback that we got. And again, this was, I can't say it was diverse compared to other webinars and presentations that we have given because we never asked those questions, but it was interesting to see the feedback. And I would say this was a largely white population, although we did have some diversity. But again, it was across the United States. I forget what state really stood out that had a number of people from it, but by and large, white male, and I would assume Midwest, but I would have to verify that. But this was the feedback that we got in terms of what health conditions impact are impacted through racism. And then this question, what are some examples of actions agricultural health and safety professionals can employ to combat racism? We didn't only want to state the problem, look at the statistics and name that. We wanted to get at what are some actionable things that could happen? Education and awareness. These are listed in no particular order. Communicating and listening to BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, really having that dialogue, not just coming with, hey, we want to teach you something about health and safety, but hear what their concerns are. Celebrating and valuing cultural differences through social media and local newspapers. Really embracing the fabric of America and that diversity and what that looks like. For example, we've done that here at AgriSafe. Each month we have a diversity and inclusion call where we talk about various different groups, celebrate what are some of those contributions. And now we've actually started sharing those topics in a diversity piece in our AgriSafe newsletter. So it's not just us learning, but we're wanting to celebrate what those differences and contributions to agriculture are. Revising policies, rules and laws, ordinances, tax structures through institutions and political power is a big point. We can all become advocates of saying things. Efforts to create collective community events, workplace promotion of diversity hiring, leadership with equal pay structures, inclusive marketing. Another strategy we've employed here at AgriSafe is not only thinking of the outreach program or the outreach group that we're trying to reach, we're also doing things around education with the pictures that we use, things like that. We're really trying to be very intentional about our approach to diversity in all spaces, from the staff to the board, to outreach, to marketing materials. We're kind of looking at everything through this lens. And then the final question I wanted to cover is, what economic challenges have you experienced personally if you're a minority population? And so this didn't apply to everyone. So we had a lot of not applicable, but those that did respond, here were some of the comments: poor working condition, devalued voice or product, lack of healthcare access, insurance, lack of accessibility of social resources, inaccurate assumptions, or discounting the personal lived experience, lack of opportunity for advancement. And again, these are huge. I mean, they were huge issues to kind of separate out, but this starts the conversation, and we can kind of see, how can we make an impact in this space? And so to get to that, the work that AgriSafe does is through partnerships. Partnerships are a cornerstone approach of our work. And this is the same approach that we would take to address the issue of racism, the issue of promoting health equity, having a more diverse and inclusion within the organization as well as within the products that we produce. You want to do that across the spectrum. And I also put this slide in here to know that even though we had a think tank, it was never our goal to say, hey, we're going to be the leader in this space. We took several months learning what are the difference between structural and interpersonal racism, and what is bias, and what does it mean to this group, depending on, we have a very small organization, but we're from various different aspects and walks of society, and even geographically, so we had very in-depth conversations about what this means and looks like to each of us, and brought that to the table. But we really want to promote the role of partnership in this space, that it's not just going to be the ag health and safety community talking amongst itself, but it's bringing in other sectors, those policymakers, government, and figuring out what does that look like. And every community solution may not look the same. So I want to close with, and I'm sorry I've gone over a little bit, but I do want to close with a video that it's about 2 minutes, that it talks about how to dismantle. And it's a piece of an allegory from Dr. Kamar Jones, who we started with her definition of racism from the American Public Health Society. But this is talking about what are three things that we could do so we can have a empower one another in this space. So let me make sure I do this right. Click here, should be ready to go.
Small business owners use Melio to send and receive ACH payments completely free. Melio is an online
lives, not really understanding that they're moving to and through racism, but just living their ordinary lives and contributing to racism by their benign inaction. So I'm going to build on this story, get back on the conveyor belt over here, to help us know how can we act. So here we are on this crowded conveyor belt, and we're just living our lives, most of us not even paying attention or even wondering where we're going. But say one of us looks up and we see racism. Well, one reaction is to close your eyes. That's denial, right? Or another reaction is to turn around. You're still going in the same direction. Maybe you're colorblind. But if we do not, and you know what that shows you? That shows you that racism is most often passive. Most often shows up as inaction in the face of need. But if we're on this conveyor belt and we don't want to go there, then what we have to do is start walking backwards, right? And we need to walk at least as fast as it's going, not to go that way, but now we have to start walking faster if we don't want to. We really want to get away from that. And what happens when you start walking backwards on a crowded conveyor belt? You bump into people and they say, hey, buddy, watch out. Where are you going? And this is your opportunity to do the first of 3 steps in terms of being actively anti-racist, and that is to name racism. You say, look, do you see where we're going? Do you want to go there? And most people will say, just stop bothering me. But maybe 1 or 2 will turn around with you. So now you're 2 or 3 walking backwards on this conveyor belt. And now where are you headed? You're not just going away from racism, but now you're actually going to understand the conveyor belt motor. And now you're going to do the second of the 3 stages of anti-racism, which is to ask, how is racism operating here? And so maybe one of you thinks it's a lever, and you pick the lever up, and the belt jolts because the lever is part of it. But it's a very smart conveyor belt, so whoop, it reconfigures itself and keeps going. So now you have to do the third thing to be actively anti-racist, which is to organize and strategize to act with others who are on the other side, trying this dial or trying this button. And I believe that we together can dismantle the system and put in its place a system in which all of us can know our full potential and have the opportunity to develop to our full potential. So I have...
Sorry, that was a little choppy with my sharing. So let me get back to the presentation there. So that was just a key piece, and it's a 20-minute clip. I would highly recommend it. It really gives a nice allegory around race and racism. And the closing comments were really about dismantling racism and what each of us could do in that to help with that. And she named 3 things: naming racism when it's seen, when it's recognized, ask how is it working here? How is racism working here? And then organize and strategize and act with others to, counter that. And so that's kind of what our strategy has been, starting with the think tank and then bringing and promoting those ideals forward and thinking about how can we do things different. And it's not saying that is actively or intentional, but just, not being maybe aware that certain things are in play and trying to address it. So intentionality becomes very, very important. So just with this is just a brief introduction. We have a working paper that kind of talks a little bit more about this and our strategy and what we hope to do in the future around, again, being intentional around diversity within AgriSafe and our outreach and diversifying our safety presentations and being inclusive across the spectrum. But our AgriSafe staff team, as well as our board of directors. And then we had a public health professional from the Louisiana Department of Health, Dr. Earl Nuxis. Benjamin Robinson helped us kind of have that brief conversation because, again, just trying to put context to the issue of racism, just to start the conversation. And then here are resources that will be shared in this presentation will be shared. So I will stop there and welcome any comments. I do apologize for going over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We do have I think we can take a quick minute for questions or comments as our next presenter is getting set up. Gail, if you could make Marcela a co-host, I think then she'll be able to share. But in the meantime, thank you, Knesha. Dr. Jones gave us a talk here at the University of Iowa College of Public Health a few years ago, and it was just, it was memorable to say the least. I mean, she's a gifted storyteller and really weaves together so many complicated things.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Yeah, questions or comments from our group? All right. Well, as Knesha said, the presentation will be shared and the resources that she's made available and that AgriSafe is working on will be available as well. So this is a start, right?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I would like to introduce our first poster presentation of our 2021 MRASH conference and welcome Marcela Carvaljal. She's an outreach project specialist at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, College of Public Health, Center for Reducing health disparities in Omaha, Nebraska. And she's part of a Latino outreach and engagement team that focuses on community-based health research and education initiatives in areas such as agricultural health and safety, immigrant integration, and community well-being. And her poster is titled "A Snapshot of Immigrant Hispanic Women Working in Feedlots in the Midwest of the US." So as we continue to spotlight and raise the cloak of invisibility on often invisible workers, Marcela, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. I know for some reason when I share the screen, my microphone goes away. So thank you for the opportunity to talk during this conference, and thank you for the introduction. This poster presentation is a snapshot of immigrant Hispanic women working in cattle feed yards in the Midwestern United States. Data for this poster presentation comes from the health and safety among Latino immigrant cattle feed yard workers in the Central States region. And this is a collaborative research with a multidisciplinary team from various universities and community organizations. The PI is Dr. Atina Ramos, who was the moderator this morning. We are in Nebraska, as you said, in the Center for Reducing Health Disparities at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. One of the goals of this research was to explore and describe the health status and occupationally related risks among Latino immigrant cattle feed yard workers in Nebraska and Kansas. So we invited to participate current workers employed on cattle feed yard operations who self-identified as immigrant of Hispanic Latinos. We had a total of 243 participants in our research, and 99% were female. Previous research has reported that many Latino immigrants are employed as hired livestock workers in dairy and hog farms, but there is limited research that is addressing women's engagement in other types of intensive animal feeding operations in the US, such as the cattle feed yards, which have been reported to have high occupational injury rates. So from our data, we want to highlight the Latina immigrant women working in Midwestern feed yards are engaged in dangerous animal handling tasks with limited regular and ongoing health and safety training, increasing their likelihood of injuries and lost productive time. And this is I'm glad that you guys propose this new format for poster presentations, because that I feel engage a little bit more the audience to see what is really what we want to show. We found that women participating in our research have job tasks that are usually male dominated and hazardous, such as we can see here in the graph, 63% of the women that participated in our study do this task at work. And you can tell that these percentages don't add up, and it is because a cattle feedlot worker usually has more than one task assigned. So other hazardous tasks where women are involved include the feed delivery and hospital. They work in the hospital, which they have to, or handling animals is required for this specific task. Here in the demographic information, it's good to highlight that these women are they're common immigrants from Latin America. Most of them are from Mexico, with a mean age of 38 years. They work in average 5 days a week and about 9 hours per day, and many of them live with children. They have worked in average 10 years in the agriculture in 5 years in feed yards. The feedlots where they work are quite large, with an average of 23,000 cattle. About 30% of women reported ever being injured on a feed yard. So this is an opportunity to think about exploring more this topic in future research. This is only a snapshot of a small group of Latina that we found while doing this research. We should focus on the occupational risk associated with job tasks conducted by female livestock workers, for sure. This information also makes us reflect on the need of agricultural health and safety outreach and training that should be not only culturally and linguistically tailored, but it also needs to be tailored by gender. I think with that, I think I use more than the 5 minutes, but I think there's few presenters here, so I don't know if I have time for questions, so we're going to wait for the next presenter, and then
I think we can take a moment for a couple of questions. I think we certainly have time before our 12:30 transition. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about the types of tasks that are included in the cattle processing category. I mean, I'm kind of imagining tagging and vaccinations and things, but maybe maybe it's more specific than that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, so the way we ask for the type of activities that they were conducting was through a self-reported survey. In the hospital, for example, they are usually tagging, or they are vaccinating, or they're usually veterinarians, but they're also trying to take the cattle through the head gate and all these animal handling tasks that usually are conducted by male were reported by this group of women. Cattle processing, this is like the most common activity that was reported. You will think that women will be mostly in the administrative tasks or activities, or doing other type of jobs, but this shows a different picture.
Thank you. Other questions from Marcela? A couple of thank yous. And
Marcela, this is Casper Bendixson, the National Farm Medicine Center.
Hi.
Have you ever? I'm trying to pay attention, and I may have missed part of this, but do you see any sort of deliberate hiring of women in livestock handling? I've heard of a number of cattle operations that tend to prefer to hire women, especially when it comes to care of livestock. I don't know if you were able to see any of that in your efforts.
Yeah, we didn't explore that specifically. I think that's a really good opportunity for our next research project to explore more in deep this issue. But yeah, thank you, Cap, for the question. It didn't come to, I don't have that information.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I know of at least one in cattle operation. I don't know if we'd call it a feed yard, but maybe, where it's almost exclusively women workers, and they did it on purpose because of the relationship they tend to have with animals. Actually, is one of the reasons for justification. The husbandry aspect.
Yeah, we have, and most of the research has been conducted on dairy farms, and I know that that has happened among dairy farms, and it influences like the state of the cattle, if they are stressed out or not. But among cattle feed yards, there is little research on that, and I think that's why one of the recommendations is to know more about this specific group of women working in with these specific tasks.
Thanks. And one more question in the chat, and then I think we'll move on to our second presenter. Rashad asks, how is women leadership seen in feed yards? How are women who are leaders in feed yards responded to? Can you speak to that?
How is women leadership seen in feed yards? Rashad, in this specific research, we didn't get that information, but from other sources, we know that there's women that have been in the let's say management positions in feed yards. Many of them maybe come from like family operated farms, but I think there is leadership, but not the number that we probably would like. We are with Dr. Atina Ramos, we're working right now on getting that information by conducting some interviews with feed yard managers. So thank you for the question. And I think for the next conference, we're going to have a very good information to give you.
Great. Thanks so much. And we will move on to our second poster session for today. Our presenter is Abigail Kahrs. She is an MPH candidate at Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center, and she previously received her Bachelor's of Science in Animal Science at Louisiana State University. During the fall 2021 semester, she is serving as a women's health intern at AgriSafe Network, and she'll be contributing to a joint One Health initiative with AgriSafe and the Central State Center for Agricultural Safety and Health. Her poster is titled One Health, Female Reproductive Health for Agriculture Workers. And you should be able, yep, there you go. You got it.
Thank you. Like she said, my name is Abigail Kahrs. I am partnering with Central State's Center for Agricultural Safety and Health, as well as Gallagher Insurance for this project. And the intention of our project was to use a One Health approach to recognize the connection between people, animal, plants, and their shared environment to address women's reproductive health and occupational exposures for those working with beef cattle. We expanded on worker safety in feed yards by researching commonly used cattle medications, such as hormones, antiparasitic drugs, I apologize, and modified live virus vaccines. So basically what we wanted to do was to highlight the additional risks that pregnant women in agriculture, specifically in the feed yards handling the animals directly, face that might not be common knowledge to them. And many safety education resources that revolve around agriculture often excludes women, and specifically women's reproductive health. So we wanted to create an easy to read and understandable resource for both women who are handling livestock and their healthcare providers to access and gain knowledge of potential risks that come working directly with livestock in the feed yards. So like I said, right now we're in development of a resource that will train women who are farming, ranchers, animal husbandry experts in the veterinary field. But that's still in progress right now. So the QR code at the bottom, actually, it was intended to send to the resource, but it just sends to AgriSafe Network's learning page, like learning, their learning resource page, which hopefully this will be there in the upcoming months. But for this project and this poster, we used the NIOSH 2014 study of agricultural work-related injuries to gather information on hormones such as oxytocin, progesterone, and prostaglandin, which is typically used in beef cattle operations. And we found that some hormones can be absorbed through the skin and can cause abortion in pregnant women. And then as well as we looked up medications such as ivermectin and Micotil, which many medications are toxic if swallowed and can damage fertility to the female or harm the fetus that she's carrying. We also looked at hazards with vaccinations. So many vaccinations can cause spontaneous abortion or infertility if you happen to get poked with the needle. We also looked into physical hazards such as falls, dehydration, heat stress, and all of those related physical hazards that can also adversely affect pregnancy, as well as biohazards, so zoonotic diseases, which would be responsible for miscarriage, stillbirth, even preterm delivery or birth defects. So in reality, we just wanted to come up with a kind of like a guide that's easy to read for someone who isn't quite sure, I'm pregnant, but I also work with the livestock hand in hand. I don't know what to do or what to look out for. And so that's the goal of this project. And we also looked into protection that the women could use while handling the livestock in the beef feed yard. And we found that a lot of the protection was pretty much, make sure you're using puncture resistant gloves when handling anything injectable. So hormones, vaccinations, or even medications. Have a designated prep area so that the medication isn't mixing with any feed or your food that you plan on eating while at work, as well as a buddy system to administer any vaccination, hormones, or medications, just so that, you never know, something could happen. You'd want somebody there who can help you in case, the cattle get out of control, anything like that. And just basically to try to be as safe as possible. But that's pretty much the gist of it. If anybody has any questions, feel free.
Great. Thanks so much. Any questions from?
All right. And then these are my resources as well. Sorry.
Perfect.
But I'll go back to
Perfect.
speech.
I have a student here who's interested in looking into altrenogest, which is used in pork production to synchronize estrus. And one thing that she's finding is just how challenging it is to figure out exactly what's being used in different operations and sort of how they're handled. So I think, I appreciate you taking on the issues, particularly with hormones and medications and vaccinations. And it's a really complex, every farm is different. So.
Exactly. We kind of went into a rabbit hole trying to figure out, well, which specific things do they typically use? And then it's like, this will happen if, a human uses it for human use. And like, that's not really what we're looking for. It's just, there's not a lot of research out there, but hopefully there will be soon.
Yeah. And one thread we're trying to take too is, one thing is to talking to producers, but also to talk to vets about what they recommend. So at least to get maybe a domain of in a county, for example, what's being recommended by the local vets, to maybe to get a better understanding of what might be in use.
Yeah.
Current questions from our audience.
Abigail, do you want to talk a little bit about what some potential tools you're for development that you've kind of been considering for this information?
So we've been considering doing, thank you for that. We've been considering doing a doodly presentation. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with the format, but it would be like a maybe 2-3 minute video that would kind of highlight what Doodly does is like draws out the picture as someone's narrating and kind of give you a simplistic view as opposed to just listening to someone talk. Some people might be visual learners and easier for them to understand the information that way. But we're thinking about doing like a 3 to 5 minute Doodly, which would highlight, some of the most important hazards that we feel are most common with women in the livestock feed yards and, protection, how to approach them. And then I believe we're updating a webinar, but I'm not 100% sure.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks so much. Any other last questions for Abigail? All right, great work. What a great morning. I have much to think through. Like sort of, we tied a lot of threads together. So thanks to everybody who participated. And I hope you're thinking ahead as much as I am about what comes next.